Today we're going to show you how to paint this freshly plastered wall. First thing, we've got to prepare this plaster ready for painting. What we do is we apply a thing called a mist coat. It's basically a watered down layer of paint. What happens is when we put it on top of the plaster, it won't rip all the moisture out of it straight away, and that'll stop it from flaking and falling off. So what we want to do is make sure that we get the first layer right. So we're going to apply the mist coat. Before that, we're going to give this wall a quick sand down. Now the reason is plasterers, I'm a plasterer myself, we tend to make walls very smooth. Now it feels great, it's good for the customer, it's good for everyone, yeah? Not really, it's not very good for the painter. What we need to do is, even though it's smooth, we need to apply a bit of a key. So what I'm going to do is gently rub this wall down to give it a bit of a key before we get started. So the thing I'm using for this is this. This is a sanding block. This was a great tip that I learned from a painter decorator, a good friend of mine called Ben Mays. He's a solid decorator, one of the best decorators I know. And he showed me this, and I thought this is a great little way to get your preparation on the wall started. So what I'm going to do is flat, straight. I'm just going to give this wall a little rub down. Nothing crazy. Just going to give it a little rub all the way through. And what that's going to do is give it a gentle key. It's not going to rub it too much. This is a fine sanding block, so it's not too coarse, it's not too aggressive. It's just going to give it a gentle key, which means when you paint it, it's not going to slide off. It's going to have a bit of grip so it can hold onto that plaster and give it a nice hold onto that first base coat, which is very important. And where I've got the corners, I'm just going to gently come in with a sanding block. Corners are crucial to get right, because as a plasterer I know that that is one of the hardest things that a plasterer can do, is make sure they get their corners nice and tight. So we give the corners a nice little sand. This is why these blocks got a nice 90-degree angle there, which means you can get into them corners nicely. You won't get that with a normal sandpaper. You can use a bit of block, but this just does it all for you. So I'm just going to get them corners boxed off. Back in there, on the top. We also want to pay close attention around the plug sockets. Now these is a major area that plasterers struggle with, which is why we want to really make sure that we get them right. So give that sand right around the plug socket there. Excess dust off the wall. Again, we don't really want to sand it to the point of back to nothing. We just want to give it a bit of a light key. So we're not going crazy on this. Just a quick sand down. We're literally just a rapid sand right through on the plaster. Don't go crazy. But we also want to sweep the dust up from the floor. There's going to be a lot of dust falling down. The last thing you want is getting paint onto a dusty surface, because it just won't stick and you just lead into a world of trouble. So for a bit of prep, sweep up. Okay, so now we've got it sanded down, we've got it prepped, and we've got it ready for that first initial coat of paint. Now this is called a mist coat. Say that again. It's basically a watered down version of a paint, which means it's got a high moisture content, which means that the porous background of the plaster is going to allow it to dry gently. Just using the cheap contract layering mat, it's called. It's really good reviews, a lot of painters are using it, and to be honest, it's nice and cheap. As a DIYer like yourself, you don't want to be spending load on the mist coat, because it is just a base coat of paint. That's all it is. We don't really want to be spending loads. If you are a professional painter, you'll probably use something a bit more hard wearing, with longevity, and a bit easier to use. But as a DIY enthusiast, I think this is great paint to use. We want to water it down. We want to put about 30% water to 70% paint. That is a decent amount for this particular paint in general. You could go 50-50 if you like. But that just means it might get a bit messier, it might lead to a few more drips. For me, I've just gone 30% water, 70% paint. So the first thing, mixed up the paint, I've added the water to the paint. All we're going to do is start the angles. So I've got there, just going to start on the internals. Gently cut in the edges of the plaster. Adding a nice layer all the way through on the corners. So the cutting in is just going to make it a lot easier for the later stages when it comes to rolling the rest of the wall. Now again, it might look a bit blotchy, it might not look fully consistent with the colour, but that's not an issue. All we're doing with this first layer of mist coat is making sure that we're sealing the plaster, making sure that it's not going to rip out the moisture from the top coat, and it just ensures it's got a lovely, clean base ready for the future stages of this painting here. Okay, so we've cut in the plaster work. We've got a nice solid border all the way around the edges, and that means it's just going to be easier for the next stage. The next thing we want to do is just roll the majority of the paint onto the wall, and we use a paint roller. I'm not teaching you how to suck eggs, by the way, I'm showing you, but for anyone who didn't, I'm just making sure we're clear in what we're using. So the cutting in brush, we'll talk about that brush in particular later on in this video. Now I want to get the majority of this rolled out. So let's get started. So now we've got the paint roller, we've got it loaded up. What we're going to do is with a figure of W, we're going to apply the paint. Now, what we're going to do is meet up to the point where we've got the cutting in, work to the edges and work down. This might seem like it's going to be a bit blotchy to begin with, and that's absolutely fine. What we're looking for here is to seal the plaster. We're not looking to necessarily get a nice clean finish all the way through. We're just sealing that plaster so then when it comes to the later stages, it's not going to be so porous and dry out. What you will find is that the paint is going to dry very fast. So what I'm doing is making sure we haven't got any streaks. The worst thing you can do when you're cutting in or when you're applying your mist coat is put it on too thick and put it on too fast. So if you've got a big area and you've whacked it on in one hit, you might see streak marks running through. That's why when you see me doing it, I'm constantly going back on myself. What I'm doing is making sure that we're not leaving any lines behind. If you have lines in your mist coat, it's going to shine through on every layer of paint after this point. So you want to make sure that one, you're taking your time with how far you're putting on, because like I said, the plaster is really going to dry out that plaster. It's going to pull the moisture out of it and it's going to make it dry very fast. And two, we've got to roll back on ourselves to make sure we haven't got any streaks. So let me show you again. So again, we're going to put the majority of the paint towards the centre, and then we're going to work it outwards, left and right. And what we're doing is constantly going over ourselves because like I said, it will dry very fast and it will leave streaks if you're not careful. So we really need to make sure that we're constantly coming back on ourselves, taking out the big lines, the tram lines from either side of the roller and making sure it's nice and smooth. So that's the first layer of paint done, the mist coat. That's what's going to seal the plaster. Now, from now on, you want to leave it for about 2 hours and you want to make sure that it's pretty dry, touch dry. So by the time you mist coated the room, got everything swept up, you should be good to go to the next stage. But what I want to say is a few things. Don't worry if there's a few blotches on your plaster. That's absolutely fine. This isn't necessarily to get a nice first coat. This is to make sure that the plaster's sealed and it's not going to have that porous nature to it. It's not going to suck all the moisture out of the layers of paint after this. That bit's done. From now on, we're not going to do a mist coat again. We're not going to use contract matte. We're not going to use a watered down paint solution. That is done. From now on, we're going to use a finished paint. But first, we've got to get some filling done. So now what we're going to do is going to start to fill. Now, despite being the best plasterer in the world, you could be the best, you could also be the worst. No matter what, a wall always needs filling. I'm going to show you why. At the moment, it looks pretty good, but the reason we put the mist coat on first is because it tends to show any imperfections. Now, at the moment, it looks pretty good, but let me show you an important trick, an important way to enhance your filling ability. What I'm going to do is turn the spotlights on above. Let's see what the difference is. Now, a great way to see any imperfections in the wall is by having sideward glancing light, whether it's from above or from the side. If you turn a powerful light on and put it bang on the side or bang on from above, then what it's going to do is highlight every single imperfection. For example, great if you've got a wall and you've got the sun streaming in from the right. That is called sideward glancing light and it's the best way to see any imperfections in a way. What I can see is we've actually got quite a few little bits where the mist coat is showing. We've got some high spots. So I'm going to grab my scraper, give it a good scrape. Get rid of any high spots there. What I can see is everything in the way. So I've got a little patch here where the paint's actually bubbled up. It's a bit thick. Scrape that back. What we want to do now is start to get rid of any imperfections. So we're going to give it all. Any areas that you see that don't look right, give it a little scrape. So I didn't actually notice these before. Now with the mist coat on, like I said, it shines and shows any imperfections on the wall. But not only that, with the downward lights shining down at that particular angle, we can see every minor imperfection. Now what we want to do is fill any areas that are low. Now what we're going to use, the product I'm going to be using is this. It is Easy Fill 60. It's a great filler. It's powder form, so you've got to mix it yourself, but I must admit it's one of the best fillers in terms of sanding down and in terms of coverage. You can get to a depth of 11 mil with this product. So if there are any deep areas, deep cracks, and you can really fill it with this. This is a great product to sand down, and because it's 60, it will be sandable in 60 minutes. Now, if you are just a DIY, you're not used to the product, just get the usual easy fill. It doesn't have to be easy fill 60, because I must admit this dries quite fast. I tend to mix it in one of these little tubs. Now these are brilliant, because when it does dry out, you ain't had time to clean it, just literally flex in your hands, crack out the product, and you're good to go again. Again, my good friend Ben Mays recommended this. He's a solid painter decorator. I'm going to try and get him on this show actually. I'm going to get him to show us some professional tips on how to paint, because I'm not a painter by any means. I'm going to show you how to do it on a freshly plastered wall, but I'm by no means a painter, so we'll get him in for tips for this. Always apply the powder first. I'm only going to need a little bit, so you just put a little bit of powder into your tub and slowly add water. That way you're not going to mix too much, and you're going to have the ability to control how much is there. If you put the water in first and then add the powder, you'll have way too much going on. So just gently add the products, just a little bit. Again, I don't need a lot. Only got a little bit going on, so I'm going to add the powder first. Just have it in the tub. Slowly add the water in there, and then that way you can just mix it as you go. And when you're filling, we're not trying to get it perfect. We are literally just applying it to the blemished area and leave it. You don't want to keep playing with it with your filling knife. Just apply a layer, and then later on we're going to sand it back so it's perfect. So for now, don't play with it. Just apply it onto the section needed and then leave it. I'll show you how to do that now. So the filling is probably where I struggled most, because I'm a plasterer. I want to make sure everything's perfect. But all we want to do is put a thin layer on, but you want to leave a little bit to sand down. So what you can see, there's a slight bit of thickness on there. So you're not going to keep trying to smooth it down to nothing. You want to make sure you've got a tiny bit of thickness on top. So when you come to sanding it, you've got something to work with. If you put it on too thin and too smooth, then you might not have enough filler to work with, and you might have to fill it again, which you might have to do anyway, but to reduce your chances, we're just putting the filler on and then leaving it. We're not going to keep playing with it, because it comes to the sanding where that's the important stages. So as you can see, it's slightly raised to the plaster, but when it comes to using the sanding blocks, in no time at all. Now what you're left with is a bit of filling. So what you want to do, using the sanding block like we used at the beginning of the video, you're going to use the same block, and you're just going to gently rub that filler down until you get a nice smooth flat wall, and then you go down to the finishing, which is the next stage of painting. But in this video we've covered how to do a mist coat, how to do it effectively, and like I said, I'm going to make you a deal. If you hit the like and we get 30,000 views on this video, I'll get my mate Ben Mays to come in and we'll show you an expert video on how to get painting like a master. So thanks a lot for watching, and if you like the panelling on the right side there, I've got a video that's going to pop up showing you how to do that. Acoustic wall panelling, it's great stuff, so watch out whilst you're waiting for me and Ben. Nice one, cheers.